Imagine running a company so close to running out of money that your own accountants are counting down the days you have left before the lights go off for good. Not months. Days. Somewhere between 60 and 90 of them, by the account the man who walked back into the building later gave. No dramatic explosion, no single scandal, just a slow, quiet bleed toward zero. And then, less than a decade later, that same company becomes one of the most valuable businesses that has ever existed, worth more than the entire economies of most countries on the planet combined. Today we're breaking down exactly how that happened, the almost death, the strange rival who wrote a check to save it, and the one product bet that changed everything. And I promise you, the business model behind it is not what most people think it is. Welcome to Inside the Business. This is the channel where we pull back the curtain on how the world's biggest companies actually got built, past the highlight reel and into the moments they'd probably rather you forgot about. And this one might be the best comeback story we've covered yet, so let's get into it. Rewind to the mid-1990s. If you wanted a personal computer back then, the default answer wasn't even a question anymore. It was a Windows machine, built by any number of cheap manufacturers competing on price, all running the same Microsoft operating system underneath. That standardization had basically become gravity. It pulled offices, schools, and households in one direction. And the one major company still trying to do things its own way, its own operating system, its own hardware, its own design language, was increasingly treated like a relic. Expensive. Incompatible with the software everyone else used. A niche choice for designers and holdouts, not a serious option for the mainstream. Inside the company, things were arguably worse than they looked from outside. There wasn't one flagship computer line. There were a dozen confusingly similar models that even employees struggled to tell apart, with names and specs so close together that customers in stores genuinely couldn't figure out which one was meant for them. Leadership had cycled through multiple CEOs in just a few years, each arriving with a different turnaround plan, and none of those plans surviving long enough to actually turn anything around. Meanwhile, the operating system underneath all of it, the actual software running the machines, had fallen years behind what the competition was shipping, and internal attempts to build a modern replacement from scratch had quietly failed, one after another, burning time and money without producing anything usable. By this point, analysts weren't just skeptical anymore. Some were openly speculating about a fire sale, a breakup and sell-off of the pieces, or straight-up bankruptcy. Talk of the company simply not existing in 5 years wasn't fringe commentary. It was showing up in mainstream business coverage. This wasn't a company with one broken part that needed fixing. It had lost its sense of what it was even for, and everyone, inside and outside the building, could feel it. So let's rewind further, to understand the person who eventually walked back in the door. This company had actually been co-founded 20 years earlier, in a garage, by two guys building computers for hobbyists. One of them was a young, intense product visionary who helped turn that garage project into a real business, and then, in one of the most infamous boardroom dramas in tech history, got pushed out of his own company in a power struggle in 1985. Getting fired from the thing you built from nothing will change a person. He didn't fade away. He went and founded a new computer company, one that struggled to sell hardware but quietly built something genuinely ahead of its time on the software side. By late 1996, the struggling giant he'd been pushed out of needed exactly what his new, much smaller company had built. So it bought that company for roughly $400 million, and in doing so, brought him back into the building, at first just as an advisor. It didn't stay that way for long. Within months, the sitting CEO was pushed out, and by the middle of 1997, the man who'd been fired 12 years earlier was effectively running the company again. And here's the part most people get wrong about his comeback. His first move wasn't a bold new invention. It was ruthless subtraction. He took that confusing sprawl of a dozen-plus product lines and slashed it down to almost nothing. Just a small handful of computers, organized on a simple grid, consumer or professional, desktop or portable. And then he did something that shocked the industry. He struck a deal with the company's fiercest, most dominant rival. That rival agreed to invest $150 million into the struggling business, and committed to keep building its popular office software for it for years to come. Yes, the archenemy wrote the check that helped keep the lights on. If you haven't guessed by now, this is the story of Apple. And that near-death moment in 1997 is the version of the company most people forget ever existed, because the version that came after completely overshadowed it. Let's sit in that low point for a second, though, because it's the part of the story with the real tension. This wasn't a single dramatic crisis, no one headline moment where everything nearly collapsed. It was worse than that. It was a slow bleed through 1996 and early 1997, falling market share quarter after quarter, mounting losses, a real and rising chance that the company would either get acquired for parts or simply run out of runway entirely. And taking money from Microsoft, of all companies, wasn't just a financial lifeline, it was humiliating. Imagine having to ask your biggest competitor, the company that had effectively taken over the market you invented, to bail you out just to survive another year. The hard decision Steve Jobs made in that moment wasn't glamorous, and it wouldn't have made a great headline at the time. He decided to stop trying to be everything to everyone. He killed off side projects, canceled confusing product variants, and forced the entire company to fit onto that simple 2x2 grid. It wasn't an exciting fix. It was almost boring. But it stopped the bleeding, and it bought the company time to think clearly again instead of just reacting. And that clarity is what set up the real turning point, which, contrary to what a lot of people assume, was not the iPhone. That came a full decade later. The turning point came first in 1998, with a strange, colorful, egg-shaped all-in-one computer called the iMac. It didn't look like anything else on the market. Translucent, brightly colored plastic, designed by a young designer named Johnny Ive who Jobs had discovered still working quietly inside the company. The iMac wasn't a technical revolution. It didn't outspec anything. What it proved was something more important, that this company could still make people want something, not just tolerate it because it was compatible with what they already owned. That same design first instinct carried forward into 2001, with a small white device that could fit 1,000 songs in your pocket, the iPod. It repositioned the entire company. It was no longer the struggling computer company that lost the PC wars. It was becoming a lifestyle brand, one where design and experience mattered more than raw specifications. Each of these moves was a calculated bet built on the same underlying philosophy: tightly integrate the hardware and the software, control the whole experience end to end, and make the product feel inevitable rather than merely functional. That philosophy is what eventually led to the boldest bet of all, a phone announced in January 2007 that combined a phone, an iPod, and an internet device into a single piece of glass and aluminum, and effectively created the smartphone era as we now know it. So how does this company actually make money today, and why has that turned into one of the most durable business models in the world? It runs on two connected engines. The first is hardware: the phones, the computers, the tablets, the watches, and earbuds. The second, and increasingly the more important one, is services: the App Store taking a cut of every app and in-app purchase, subscription products like music and cloud storage, payments, and licensing deals. On the cost side, the company doesn't actually own most of its manufacturing. It designs everything in-house, but leans on manufacturing partners and specialized chip suppliers to actually build the physical products, which keeps the balance sheet lighter than you'd expect for a hardware company at this scale. The real moat, though, the thing that's genuinely hard for any competitor to copy, is ecosystem lock-in. Once someone owns the phone, the laptop, the earbuds, and the watch from the same company, all of them talking to each other seamlessly, switching to a competing brand doesn't just mean buying a new device. It means giving up how effortlessly all of those things work together. Add to that a brand strong enough that people line up and pre-order new products before a single independent review has even been published, and you've got a business model that's less about winning any one product category and more about owning the entire environment someone lives inside. Think of it like a toll bridge over a river. The company doesn't just sell you the car to drive across, it also collects a small toll every single time you use the bridge, whether that's buying an app, subscribing to a service, or making a payment. And because that bridge is by far the smoothest way to connect to all the other things you already own from the same company, most people never even seriously consider building or using a different route. So where does all of this leave the company today? As of the middle of 2026, it sits among the very largest companies on the planet by market value, trading places with a couple of other tech giants for the title of most valuable company in the world, with its worth measured well into the trillions of dollars. To put that in perspective, that single company is worth more than the entire annual economic output of most nations on Earth, built from a business that 2 decades earlier genuinely wasn't sure it would survive the year. But it's not smooth sailing across the board, and that's worth sitting with too, because comeback stories tend to get told as if they end in permanent victory, and they don't. Rising costs tied to a global shortage of memory chips have been squeezing device pricing right now, forcing some uncomfortable decisions about margins versus affordability. There's also a real, ongoing conversation across the industry about whether this company is moving fast enough on artificial intelligence compared to some of its most aggressive rivals, many of whom are shipping new AI capabilities at a pace that's made even this famously deliberate company look like it's playing catch-up for the first time in years. On top of that, regulators around the world continue to scrutinize how it runs its app marketplace and takes its cut from developers, with ongoing legal battles that could reshape how much control it retains over its own ecosystem. Even a multi-trillion-dollar comeback story, it turns out, never fully closes its last chapter. There's always a new threat waiting on the horizon, which might honestly be the most useful lesson of all. So what can we actually take from all of this, beyond just admiring the number on the stock ticker? First, simplify before you innovate. The very first move in the comeback wasn't a flashy new invention. It was cutting a confusing, bloated product lineup down to almost nothing. If you're trying to fix something that's struggling, whether that's a business, a project, or even your own daily routine, the instinct to add something new is usually wrong. Cut what isn't working first. Clarity creates the space that real innovation actually needs to happen in. Second, a humbling deal can still be the right deal. Taking money from your fiercest rival, in front of the entire industry watching, is not a comfortable position to be in. But it kept the company alive long enough to rebuild on its own terms. Pride is expensive, and sometimes the partnership, the compromise, or the deal that stings the most in the moment is exactly the thing that buys you the time you need to win later, on a much bigger stage. Third, design and integration can be the moat itself. The iMac and the iPod didn't win because they had the best specifications on paper. They won because of how the hardware, the software, and the overall experience work together as one coherent thing. In a crowded market where everyone is racing to add more features, how well your pieces actually fit together can matter far more than any single standout feature ever could. From roughly 90 days away from running out of money to becoming one of the most valuable companies that has ever existed, this company's comeback wasn't luck, and it wasn't a single genius idea either. It was ruthless focus first, followed by one design-led bet after another, compounding over almost 30 years. And that's the part most people never see from the outside: the 90 days from bankruptcy, the rival's check, the quiet redesign of a computer that had nothing to do with a phone. The headline is always the trillion-dollar number. The real story is always what happened before anyone was paying attention. That's the whole reason this channel exists, because every giant company you think you already know still has a version of its story it's never told you. If today's video pulled back a curtain you didn't expect, that's exactly what we're here for, every single time, so hit subscribe and stay on the inside with us. And if there's one person in your life who's obsessed with business, startups, or just loves a good comeback story, send them this video. That's genuinely how this channel grows, one person showing another the story they didn't know they needed. So go ahead, share it, and let's get someone else inside the business too. Next time, we're stepping inside a company that almost destroyed itself, not through failure, but through its own runaway success. That one might be even harder to believe than this one. See you in